All right, RTD Q&A midday live stream. And I'm excited to have a returning guest. And so I mentioned before we went live at how I'm guilty of not having you on sooner because as I looked at the last time we had a chance to speak, I'll actually put up on the screen here. It was April 27th of 2017. And the title, which is what I want to start off with today, was "The Time is Coming. It's a Mathematical Certainty."
Right.
And I think we're kind of reaching that point now of that certainty you were referring to then. And so, Mr. Craig Hemke, how are you doing, my friend?
Shoot, I've really aged in the last 3 years. My God, I might still have that shirt though. Damn, I should have. That would have been fun to drag that thing out and put it on. But no, you're right. That's people have often asked me, especially in the last couple of weeks, I should say. I've heard quite a bit about, damn, yeah, you really held in there, and it looks like you're going to end up being right. And I say, well, it wasn't complicated. This was just the math.
Yeah.
And that's, I've got faith in math. And so I'm glad you put that up because that's always been, basically the underlying premise of what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so because of the math, that creates a sense of a certainty and confidence because numbers typically don't lie if they're done correctly. And so I want to start off by, welcome everybody that's tuning in. And I appreciate Craig Hemke from tfmeadows.com joining us to share his thoughts and analysis and everything else. So Craig, welcome. And so I want to start off by asking you which direction you want to go. Do you want to go the mainstream narrative, or would you prefer to go to alternative media narrative as to where we're at now, what we've been experiencing for the last month? Where would you prefer to go down first?
That's a good question. Why don't we start with mainstream, because everybody's going to be familiar with that. And then we'll not so much the alternative. We'll talk about what's actually happening. How's that?
Fair enough. Sounds good. So the mainstream narrative is that there's a global health situation, which is the cause for all this uncertainty in the markets of all kinds and unemployment and economy shutting down and stimulus, that it goes on and on. And so, of course, the certainty you're referring to years ago was about what's currently going on underway now. Can you elaborate and shine a little light as to what this mainstream narrative is about?
Well, I think that part is correct. Obviously, as this virus has swept the globe, people have gone to these great lengths to try to control it, which, I mean, when I saw the trucks, shooting out the bleach and stuff, out of the massive, it was like those cooler fans they have at a football game, on the sidelines and blowing their steam. I mean, when I saw the Chinese deploying those trucks, I was like, holy smokes, they must know something, that they're not telling everybody.
Yeah.
Now, as you see this sweep the planet, you see what's going on. Yeah, and I suspect, Mike, there's going to come a point here when we're just going to have to deal with it. I mean, once we get past this initial push that has the risk of overrunning the hospitals, and putting all of the health service providers, the doctors and nurses and stuff at great risk. Once we get past that, I think we're all just going to have to go, well, shit, excuse me.
That's real.
It is what it is. I mean, I'm a 54-year-old guy. Actuarially, I've got about a 0.4% chance of croaking this year anyway. And I think for a healthy 54-year-old guy, I've got about a 0.4% chance from a case fatality rate with this virus too. And so I think, at some point we're going to keep the most vulnerable isolated, keep the nursing homes closed. And, if you're an older person that's a cancer survivor and you're diabetic and you have high blood pressure, you're going to have to continue to isolate yourself. But the rest of us are going to have to get back at it. Yeah. And so what's not deniable, though, is, where we are currently. And so the response to this has been the traditional response. It's like, well, we're just going to conjure up a bunch of money from nothing, some cash from nothing, and feed it out to people, which I'm totally in favor of. I wish they'd given a lot more to just regular people rather than the banks.
Yeah.
But again, that's not what we're here to talk about. Moral of the story is this. You go back to the end of last year, Congressional Budget Office puts out a projection of the rest of this decade. And they came up with about $1.2 trillion per year in annual deficit spending. Okay. Yeah. Now that was basing on their revenue. The government only has one source of revenue, and that's taxation. And they're basing those revenue numbers off of a 3% GDP growth. As far as, and we hadn't done 3% annualized since, I don't even know when, right? But the CBO cooks in these rosy assumptions and says, yeah, it's going to be 3% every year for the rest of this decade. And the U.S. going to run a $1.2 trillion deficit. Well, here's the math now. Here's where this gets funky. Think of it as, let's just overly simplify it. Let's say the U.S. was going to spend $4.2 trillion this year, which ends at the end of September. And they were going to take in $3 trillion in tax revenue. Well, they're not taking in $3 trillion in tax revenue now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's just say they do 2. Okay, all things being equal, with no additional spending, that's $2.2 trillion in deficit spending. But we know they just added on 2.1, so now we're at 4.3 for a deficit this year, and it's going to be worse than that. It's going to probably be more like 6.
Yeah.
So we're going to increase the budget deficit in the U.S. by 25% this year alone. Okay, and now we're getting to the point where things are going exponential, just like the virus. And that's that math you're talking about. You have to continually create more cash to service even just the existing debt. Eventually, that drives your currency to basically valueless, really. I mean, the more you have of something, the more you create of something, you're essentially trimming the value of the existing supply.
Yeah.
And that's the direction we're headed. And so then the question becomes, which is what, again, you focus on a lot, is what happens next? You know, can the dollar support the globe on its own in terms of being the reserve currency? I'm not sure there will be enough demand for it eventually when, you know, the math breaks down. So anyway, I'm sorry I gave you a long answer to that, but that, I think where we are in this is, I think you accurately summed it up. It's just the question is, where do we go? And that's going to be most telling.
Yeah, I think that we're currently in the time frame now where we're witnessing the erosion of our monetary system, of the global monetary system. So just not the Federal Reserve is in the same boat as every other central bank.
Yeah, right.
And it's going to be creation of funny currency to prop things up at the same time where they're using the cover up of this health scare as the blame. And so, did you ever see? And so, I always talked about the possibility of a possible war being the thing that would trigger this next need for stimulus and quantitative easing to infinity, but I never factored in a health scare.
Yeah.
But yet, it's one of those things where we can't get an idea as to how long this thing will last.
Right.
But yet, have we skipped the recession phase and entered into a depression already? Because all the numbers on unemployment that you can call them off. Have we skipped the recession and gone into a depression, in your opinion?
Yeah. What's a traditional metric? 2 quarters in a row of negative GDP, right? We might escape the first quarter with, you know, some measure of positive just because it ends, you know, obviously in March and we had January, February where things are probably moving along okay. But the second quarter doesn't look too good. And I mean, people are banning about numbers now of negative 15%. I mean, that's clearly depressionary. You know, that's economic collapse kind of stuff. But then, you know, again, though, Mike, we're kind of getting into just semantics. You know, I mean, the real situation on the ground is what's going to be most important. You know, I mean, how quickly we're not Dresden, right? I mean, the factories didn't get, you know, firebombed. The lights are off and the employees were sent home. So how quickly demand can pick up, you know, the thing kind of is a virtuous cycle of people wanting stuff again and some products again. And now all of a sudden you're going to rehire some employees and people want to come to your bar again and you're going to rehire some, you know, bartenders and waitresses and all that kind of stuff. It's how quickly can that kind of rebuild? I suspect, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here.
That's good. Go ahead.
But all this cash that has been created and will be created. Look, this isn't going to go on forever. As we record this on Monday, what's the stock market up, like 1,000 points or something?
Yeah, after being down several hundred, several thousand. It's
right. Look, if we as a country in the U.S. kind of get, and again, I'm just speculating on a timeline, but if, you know, by May or June or July, things, you know, they have a good treatment and, you know, and people think, oh, we got some studies about how many people have already had it and asymptomatically, and all of a sudden things come back online. Seriously, I mean, you'll see the Dow at record highs before the end of the year, as bleak as it looks now, because they've created these trillions of dollars of cash. Look what happened back in October when they started that repo program. Okay, the stock market bottomed on October the 11th, the day they started the repo program and the debt monetization of the T-bills and all that kind of stuff. All that cash went in the stock market, and it went basically up at a 45-degree angle all the way into February.
Yeah.
So all this cash you're creating will go into the stock market too, and I mean you'll see it come storming back. I'm certain of that. I just can't imagine that not happening.
Yeah.
But anyway, but again, to your point, what happens to the dollar? I think that's going to be really interesting because we knew there was always an event out. You mentioned war. We couldn't really have seen maybe a virus doing this kind of thing, but when the central banks were trying to keep the plates of liquidity spinning for as long as they could, but something was going to knock them off, and it's this. So now we've got to kind of look over the horizon and try to figure out what's coming next. Does the system, the monetary, I'm talking about the global monetary system, stay the way it has been basically since 1944, or does it begin to transition back to some alternative, some sound money alternative, or some combination of the dollar and the euro and the SDR and gold and all this kind of stuff? These are all, going to be really important questions as we go through this crisis. Yeah. And anybody that tells you they know exactly what's going to happen is probably just trying to sell something.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I tend to pay attention to is just ongoing trends and seeing how the economy has evolved. So we went from metals to paper, redeemable paper to digits, and now the cash ban will be coming soon because of this health scare. So my personal opinion is that they're going to try to milk the narrative of this health scare is the catalyst for everything. Your health is infected, the social aspect of things. We're being stained right now on staying away from each other. Yeah. And I would imagine that, if you go conspiratorial wise or whatever, just deep left field, the government wants to milk this as much as they can. And so the end result of what will come from this will be similar to what we had 20 years ago or the last event that took place, which we're still feeling the effects of surveillance state, TSA, stuff like that. And so the concept of the digital dollar, that's been thrown out there as a part of the, I guess it was phase 1, but Trump tweeted we were working on phase 4. So I don't know what 2 and 3 was in between, but going digital, what looks like what they might want us to do. And so do you see us continue to go towards that trend of solely digital? Or do you have hopes and think that one day metals might be brought back into the equation?
Well, we've been talking about this war on cash for years now, and the idea was if you can eliminate physical currency, then you really, what do you own? And it can be taken away from you at any time because it's all just, zeros and ones on a bank ledger someplace. Right. How much cash, your net worth, all that kind of stuff. And that gives government and central banks a lot of power over you. Just like now they have a lot of power because, Mike, like you're saying, how long is it going to be once things get back to normal? They'll say, oh God, here comes the virus again. Now that, people are afraid and herded into, basically everybody doing the same thing, going on lockdown. I'm sure they'll try to keep playing those cards to see, for as long as it works. But this idea that you can eliminate cash is definitely a part of trying to attack your personal freedom. Because like I said, it's not a very long walk from thinking that all money in cash is just a digitized, book entry to the state itself taking that away from you. Yeah. Saying, hey, look, you're fine or you're taxed or something, and they just reach right in and take it out of your account. That may sound fantastic, but I think this is all a loss of, let's call it personal sovereignty. They know that they have to create a certain amount of cash to keep the current system afloat. They're going to do it. And again, the problem is when you have an existing supply of something, if you double that supply of it, you're essentially decreasing the value of what had been the existing supply, right?
Yeah.
And so when they do that to you, that is almost a theft from you and me and anybody else that saves in dollars, because I've worked hard and I pay my bills, and what I have left over is my savings. And let's just say that goes in the bank, and I have $10,000, which is worth something, buys me some things. But if you suddenly double the money supply, well, that $10,000 I have is not necessarily worth 5 right away, but it certainly isn't this same value that it had before.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about here. That this devaluation, it is really almost a theft of your hard work.
Yeah.
But that's what they're going to do. That's obviously what they're doing now. And again, the math eventually means that if you can't grow, if you can't service the debt with the existing amount of money, then they just have to create more and more money to create the debts. And the whole thing just kind of starts going, parabolically like that.
Yeah. I'm actually going to put on the screen here something.
Yeah.
And so, we always suspected that, as you just mentioned, the only way to try to get out of this mess is create more of the same mess to cover up the prior mess, which leads to devaluation of currency. So here we have the current Fed balance sheet, and of course, this is unimaginable that they try to tighten, but yet they couldn't tighten. So now they're expanding. Now, at what point does this just go to the point where it shatters complete confidence and their ability to cover up and keep manipulating the markets, as well as people's confidence and continue to use their product, because fiat Federal Reserve notes and the digits are their product. So it belongs to them initially. We just happen to use it because of legal tender purposes. But, is this something we can see this year or perhaps next year, given the rate that they're currently on now, perhaps?
Depends upon how badly this situation evolves. If we stay on lockdown through the end of this year, I mean, what's the next? I mean, another 4 trillion? Are we going to cut? I mean, I wish we'd cut bigger checks this time to people. What are they going to do? Come back and cut $5,000 checks to everybody?
Yeah.
I mean, and the whole system is so intertwined. If I just keep thinking of the same example, but the restaurant employee living paycheck to paycheck in New York City has to pay the rent. And the reason they have to pay the rent is because the landlord has to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
And if the landlord doesn't pay the mortgage, then the mortgage defaults. And if the mortgage defaults, then not only is that a loss to the bank, that mortgage might have been securitized. And so then that's a loss to whoever owns it. I mean, and the whole thing just poof.
The domino effect. Yeah.
So they have to keep it going. But you make an excellent point. I have long contended that when the crisis happened in 2008, it caught everybody that plays along with it. And I'm talking about sovereign nations, China, Russia, all the BRICS countries that we talk about, Brazil, India, everybody else. I mean, it caught everybody that was a dollar saver. I mean, you and I save our reserves in dollars on a personal level. All these countries that trade with us with a trade surplus, they have dollar reserves as well. And they were all playing along. As long as the system goes along fine, they were playing along. But 2008 caught them all flat-footed. And it was after that China started ramping up their reserves, that Russia hardly has any treasuries now at all. And they've converted all of their dollar reserves into gold.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are they thinking? I mean, they're planning for what comes next. Now, as long as, the merry-go-round keeps going around and everybody's happy on the ride, then the system continues. But man, if we go $10 trillion in debt because nobody can get back to work, at some point these dollar creditor nations go, well, screw this. Because just as I went through this thing about you and I having our hard work and our dollar reserves devalued. What about the Chinese and the Russians and all these other countries with their dollar reserves and how they're getting devalued?
Or the fact that there's more or $100 bills or more physical paper notes outside this country and other nations saving. I know Argentina, people have savings in dollars as if that's like gold to them. Not the dollar standard.
That's true. That's true. And so so eventually, and again, this gets to the heart of your previous question. Does somebody offer an alternative? It just says because they want to get some confidence back in their currency. They know that, because for now everybody's playing along and we're all going down the same, rat hole. Yeah. The Chinese central bank is printing yuan, and the ECB is printing euros, and the Bank of Japan is printing yen, and everybody's, trying to paper over, pun intended, the problem. But, at some point, somebody or a collection of somebody's may offer an alternative as a way of getting some confidence in the currency and then getting some confidence in their system going forward. Yeah. That's probably what's coming next. But whether it comes this year or not, to answer your question, we're just going to have to see how long this paralysis, that we're paralyzed.
Yeah. So I would just to, as a worst case scenario, would prepare ahead of time, hoping, pray was to say, praying for the best, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. And so my example would be at this current moment, witnessing what they're doing to the Federal Reserve note. And it happens to be our national currency, nevertheless, the reserve currency. There's a lot of risk in between. I can say holding too much of that because it doesn't belong to us. So that's the reason why I think rethinking the dollar or understanding, because I like to go even more technical, Craig, and I say the Federal Reserve note is just simply fiat currency owned by the Federal Reserve in contract with the Treasury. Sound money comes from the mint. So the mint are the ones that, prior to them shutting down and all the things they're having, they were the ones that gave us money and the people's money. And so I have a question here that I want to touch on. And this is from Mr. Pabara. Says, ask Craig, if the new monetary system goes digital, how much more energy will it cost to maintain the digital system, and much loss of freedom will ensue?
Well, I don't know about the first part, the energy that it would take. That's not something I've ever really considered, but I do think it's a tremendous loss of freedom. As long as everything's fine, and you're a, perfectly content pawn in the system, it's like you feel pretty, up to a couple of months ago, you felt pretty good living in China, right? Yeah. But man, as soon as you speak up, you become a dissident, and then you're disappeared. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen in the US, but when all your cash is, all of your everything, your net worth, everything is just simply nothing but digits. The digits can be wiped away at any time. Yeah. And so, it is a loss of personal sovereignty. And again, even without that, you're ceding control of it, because again, the central bank, as you said, can create more of this on a whim at any time. Neil Kashkari said a week ago, and when asked on 60 Minutes, is there any limit? And he goes, no, it's infinite. We can create as much as we want. Well, again, that's a loss of sovereignty too, because you have no control over how much they can devalue your savings. So, and just, one bit of history, Mike, I'm sure your folks probably know this, but we tend to focus. I think it's part of the human condition. You really only know what you know. My whole life, like I said, I'm 54 years old. All I've ever known is this post-Bretton Woods system with the dollar as reserve currency. And I'll take it one step further. Nixon closed the gold window when I was 5. So it's not like, oh, I remember the good old days when the dollar was backed by gold, And so who does? Yeah. There are very few people around anymore that remember a time when the dollar wasn't and the reserve currency, where the U.S. didn't have that exorbitant privilege. And so it's really hard to imagine a time when it won't be that way, because it won't be like that forever. Yeah. But man, there's a real, normalcy bias or cognitive dissonance or whatever. People just think, well, this is how it was yesterday, so I'm sure that's how it's going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, I want to transition into talking about metals, because I think metals can be an antidote towards a debt-based pandemic that we're experiencing, in a sense. And so a lot of bullion dealers, online dealers are out of inventory. The mints around the world are shutting down, and even mines are closing because of this health scare. And one of my concerns that I've mentioned in prior live streams is that I would be very surprised if shelves are still able to be stocked for bullion dealers in the days ahead, given the fact that, I think just the inventory won't be there. Nevertheless, the issues with the price side of things. So let's touch on that a little bit. So this is you. Give me the rundown. What are you hearing? Give us some things behind the scenes that we may not know, or then we should know.
Well, the way things are priced, look, this goes back to when futures markets began in 1975, which actually futures trading began December 31st, 1974. Americans, after 42 years, were finally allowed to own physical gold again on January 1, 1975. Okay, so those two things are definitely related. Okay. The U.S. had pegged the price of gold and set it to the dollar after Bretton Woods. And then Nixon, suspended, or however you want to put it, the convertibility of a dollar into $35 into 1 ounce of gold in 1971. And it was after that, the deficit exploded. The cost of living went through the roof. The income disparity took off. The net worth disparity took off. I mean, all of this is caused by the Fed and this money creation. Anyway, turning this back to gold. As part of this, I mean, there was never enough physical gold to peg the price down at $35 an ounce because of the creation, the rapidly expanding money supply. So, because there never not enough physical gold to do it, the banks, the central banks and the big money center banks came up with this scheme of phony baloney. I mean, make-believe gold, alchemy, really. Yeah. So now you have futures contracts and unallocated accounts and the GLD and these ETFs and all these different ways that you can own gold exposure, but not actually own gold. And so there is a lot of speculation of, there may be, let's say, for every single ounce of gold, actual physical gold in the world, how many beneficial owners are there because of the way this whole pricing scheme of all these alternatives has been levered up? Are there 10? Are there 20? I mean, think of it this way, Mike. Here's what the banks have done. Let's say you want to buy a car from me, okay? Because you need to know that you can get out of Dodge someday when the time comes. You don't need a car per se. Yeah. You just want to know you have it when what hits the fan. So okay, I sell you the car, and you say, but just keep it in safekeeping for me. I don't actually want it. Keep it in your garage. Okay. Well, then after a while, you just know you have it, but you've never asked for delivery. So I'm like, I wonder if I could run this scheme on somebody else. So I sell that same car to somebody else under the same terms. Hey, this is your car. If you ever want to, have it, you show up and, and I do this like 50 times. That works out just fine until all 50 of you show up at the same time wanting your car, right? Yeah. That's basically what the banks have done with the supply of gold in the world. Okay. So that's the first thing people need to understand is this price you see of $1,700 per ounce is based upon a false amount of supply. All this phony baloney stuff, these derivative contracts and all this other stuff. What has since now happened in the last couple of weeks is people have shown up trying to get the exchanges in London and New York to deliver physical metal under the terms of these futures contracts. Yeah. And what's been discovered is that they don't have the metal. I mean, they've been playing these games and, and handing delivery receipts and promissory notes and warrants, and then handing it back from one bank to the other and all this kind of stuff. But when it push came to shove, and we got down to brass tacks, they didn't have the metal to deliver 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday, March the 24th. And they've been scrambling ever since. And they may keep it together, but the important thing for people to understand, that's why there's such a rush, why there is no physical metal at some of these dealers. You mentioned some of the premiums and that kind of stuff, and the refineries being shut and the mints being shut. Yeah, and that all is playing a part too. But if you don't actually hold it, if you don't actually lay your hands on it, like that car that's parked, that you parked in my garage, you don't actually own it. And when that system collapses, just like when this dollar system eventually collapses, the people that haven't prepared for that are going to be kind of left out in the cold.
Yeah. Now, because of all this scramble now to cover up all this paper stuff and digital stuff that's been brought to existence, there's going to be a one day. So do you think at some point there will be a day or an event that will lead to the realization that they can no longer use those futures to manipulate the price, and then it breaks? And if it breaks, will it be like exponential, like the same way we're seeing the pandemic curve go up and the reserve balance sheet go up? Will metals take that same dip, or do you think they still can find a way to keep it from just exponentially taking off to where we say, well, damn, like today it's $100,000.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, There are some folks that have written books on this stuff, and I have a degree in economics, but I don't consider myself an economist. But there are a lot of folks that think one of the potential remedies of this is to simply revalue the gold that's on the books, because for the U.S., I mean, the U.S. allegedly has 8,300 tons, but we still value it at $35 an ounce. And so you look at how much, gold we have versus the money supply or the total amount of debt. Well, it's not very much. But if you revalue that to $3,500 an ounce or more, well, that changes that whole math completely.
Yeah.
So if we do go that route, I would imagine the exchanges would close first. You'd have all these banks on the hook for all this phony baloney gold. The first step would be, we're going to just go ahead and close up shop and pay everybody out in cash based off last Friday's price or something like that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I mean, there's almost like infinite losses for these banks. And well, even though they're too big to fail, not a lot of folks are going to go for that. Oh, wait a second. You're printing another $3 trillion to bail out the banks because of, the losses that they took for screwing everybody on gold for the last 40 years. So anyway, that's probably the order it would go. But I do think I would be surprised. This is my own normalcy bias, I guess, Mike.
Yeah.
We all know how fraudulent the system is, but it hasn't failed yet.
Yeah. And
so I suspect they'll keep it together, through June, the next delivery period on the COMEX and all that kind of stuff. Just because they've always managed to keep it together in the past. But when normal, regardless of all that, what's being pulled back now is the veil, and more people are understanding how this works, this pricing scheme for the precious metals. And so as we get back to some kind of normal later this year, all this cash that's been created, everything, a lot of people, not only that cash going to go everywhere, stock market and gold and everything else, but a lot of people are going to go, whoa, okay, now I see, I better get myself some of that gold because I can sure see where this is headed now. They've laid their cards on the table.
Yeah.
And so I think I just think gold's going up regardless.
Yeah.
And if you haven't prepared, if you don't own some, because that's the vessel to kind of steer you through the storm, because it can't be devalued. It can't just be, it's sound, right? I mean, they can create these futures contracts and all this kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, there's only so much of the actual stuff. So if you have your hands on some, that's going to steer you through the storm. I think what we need is, for a lot of people that haven't heeded this message for the last 10 or 12 years, I'm almost kind of rooting for them that everything kind of gets back to normal for a while, so they still have a chance to lay their hands on some. And you don't take every penny you've got and put it in. You don't, just like you wouldn't put it all into real estate or art or the stock market or anything else, but it definitely is something that everybody should have as part of the, asset allocation to help protect against all of this stuff that you and I have been talking about.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the gold to silver ratio aspect. And so, a lot of the subject matter has been gold related so far, but silver. And also, I have yet to dive down that narrative to find out if it's true, but I guess Ted Butler commented on JP Morgan's holdings of the largest silver pile that I guess is known. What do you think they have in mind for that? If that is true, what do you think they have in mind for that silver stockpile? And then what's, how much more, if it is important, is silver in this current environment, given the fact that it hasn't moved in price globally, it looks like, but gold is at all-time highs in every country except, in the Federal Reserve system, basically, or the U.S., basically.
And I'll try not to go on and on forever. I think I've had too much coffee. There are three questions there. One, could silver be remonetized at some point? Because for now, it's just industrial metal. I think, and there's potential for that, especially if gold gets, repegged up to a certain amount, people use it as a basis of a monetary system again. Well, there's not that much gold. And so there may be a push to monetize silver again too. So then there's possibility of that. Regarding the silver that JP Morgan owns, I don't know. Ted can do whatever Ted does, but I've monitored JP Morgan went from having no silver at all, or at least none that was posted, didn't have a COMEX vault or anything in 2011, and they almost got overrun by price and their short position. They've used the time since to quickly open a vault in 2011, and now they have something like 160 million ounces, most of it in their house account. And in watching the gold settlements in these last couple of weeks, I think it's pretty clear that the inside term is eligible silver on the COMEX reports, the CME reports, that is actually JP Morgan's own house account silver. We watched it. I've watched it for 5 years. Every other month, JP Morgan would take delivery of physical silver into their house account. So I think that let's call it 150 million ounces is theirs. Okay. What do they use it for? I think they get an exemption from the CFTC to hedge it. And 150 million ounces is 30,000 COMEX contracts that you can deploy under this exemption. And I think that allows them to manage the price. And it's a cash cow. If anybody listening to us is familiar with the idea of selling calls against stocks in their portfolio as a way of income. Yeah. This is like JP Morgan, their desk selling not calls, but futures against their existing position and generating additional income. And it's just like free money for them. A time may come that they can stand down, but I think that's what their motive is behind it.
And so, I'm sorry, to my knowledge, with all prior large stockpiles of silver of this magnitude, I think was the Warren Buffett had something in the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. Then the Hunt brothers, those were always broken up somehow. So apart from, the CFTC and all the organizations being in on this, wouldn't you say that large of a stockpile should be a risk to national security or something of, risk to national financial monitoring? I mean, because once again, everyone else has had to resolve their large stockpiles, but not JP Morgan. Are you surprised at that at all?
No, not really. Yeah. I mean, Jamie Dimon's a made man. The organization is a systemic risk to the U.S. financial system and a primary dealer of treasury auctions, maybe the most important U.S. bank. I think they can do whatever they want. Now, I mean, the Department of Justice is finally investigating their precious metals trading. So I don't know, maybe eventually they're forced to not monopolistically control. Silver's is just this little itty bitty tiny market. I mean, you could buy all of it for all the above ground stocks for $20 billion or something like that. It's not very much money. So I don't think it's that important of a market. And again, JP Morgan holding 150 million ounces as an insider versus whatever you think of Buffett or the Hunt brothers trying to corner a market as an outsider. That's a totally different deal. Okay. So so anyway, that's a long answer to what should have just been a no. Back to your other thing. The last point that you'd asked me about was the gold silver ratio. I'll just ask you this. I mean, everybody looks at the futures price, the price they show on CNBC or Bloomberg, right? $1,700 gold and $15 silver. And they say that, gosh, the gold silver ratio is 115. This is crazy and all that stuff. And I'm sure even off the futures price, it'll come back down. However, what really is the price? Is it that? Can you and I go get physical delivery No. You go on eBay, I don't think you can find an ounce of gold for less than $1,800. And I don't think you can find an ounce of silver for less than maybe 22 or 24. Okay. So if we use those prices, the gold silver ratio is closer to 75. Yeah. So which is it? I don't ask that rhetorically. Right. I mean, that's just something for people to consider.
Right. All right. Well, as we draw to our discussion, I see a lot of people in the chat referring to cryptocurrency, and I see Bitcoin, Bitscam, and all types of lingo out there of where this channel is predominantly precious metal enthusiasts with a little bit of the new technology dipped in between. What's your assessment on Bitcoin as the initial coin that's been put out there in a cryptography based alternative for a currency, and how it's being incorporated into our current monetary structure in some form or fashion? What are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't consider myself an expert in this, and there's people that are a lot smarter than I am that think it is a possible alternative. I don't know, but I don't. I see it more as an investment with really intriguing supply-demand fundamentals. Yeah. And so I never bought it. People were screaming. I remember Max Kaiser screaming at me in 2014. You got to buy it now, and I never did. I didn't buy it until 2017 when I finally learned about this halving thing. You know what I mean when I say that? How?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So that, it's constantly being created, running these algorithms to create new Bitcoin, but every, whatever it is, 3 years, the amount that can be created, mined, new gets cut in half. And I sat back in 2017. I went, well, wait a second. How does that not work? Because if demand is increasing, but the supply is always decreasing, that should work pretty well. And it did. I bought a whopping like 3 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay. I still have 1.8. So anyway, and it's about to go, they're having again. So anyway, I just like it as, like I said, I think the supply demand fundamentals make it a good and interesting investment. I don't know if Bitcoin as its own thing is proven to be the thing that, replaces a dollar or any other currency, but that's just me.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, Craig Hemke, once again, it's been great having you on, and I appreciate you for covering a variety of subject matter. I'm going to actually put your website up here so people can see. Any last thoughts you want to leave us with before we dial back officially? And definitely, I would love to have you on, near future, a lot sooner than this past time, to get your thoughts on where we're at and go from there. But any last thoughts you want to leave us with here on Rethinking the Dollar?
Well, everybody should own some gold, right? Okay, because the world, every fiat currency regime that has ever been known to mankind has eventually gone to zero, because for all the same reasons. I mean, you can't create enough of it to service it, and eventually it goes valueless, whether that's we're seeing in Venezuela or the Weimar Republic or all the way back to Rome. Remember, Rome was like scraping the shavings off of the outside. I mean, we're still people, man. We haven't learned anything. And that's what's going to happen here too. And gold's your vessel to get through it, because eventually the pendulum swings all the way over here where it's just unlimited printing. And then it swings all the way back to the other side and then starts again. Yeah. So own gold, but you gotta get it in your own hands. You don't take anybody's promises, of, oh yeah, sure, we'll get it to you, whenever you need it. No, you're going to buy that car and you're going to park the car in your own garage. Yeah. Okay. So that would be my thing. That's what we talk about. We've done that at TF Metals Report for the last almost 10 years now. Yeah. And the online community is great. And I try to do some analysis every day to try to discern which way price is headed in the short term to kind of help people time their buys and stuff like that. But I encourage everybody to check it at just tfmetalsreport.com. But again, Mike, I'm proud of what you do. I think you do a great job, and just keep rowing the boat, because we got to warn as many people as we possibly can, to get them past that normalcy bias, and get them to understand that, while this may or may not be the crisis that changes everything, that's just inevitable. That is the math. Yeah. And so you gotta get out there. I'm like pun man, metaphor man today, Mike. You gotta cut the hay when the sun shines, all that kind of stuff. Right. I like that. Jason, you don't want to be like the Costco, right? You wanted to go to Costco and buy all your stuff in February. You didn't want to be number 1,001 in line to get in. Yeah. And for this next storm, this monetary pandemic, as you called it, you got to be preparing, before it happens. Yeah. Well, Craig Hemke, once again, it's been great having you on. Looking forward to continue to follow your work, as well as everybody here. Make sure you guys go connect with Craig. And then other than that, let's just keep, stay prayed up and continue to push forward and pray for the best. That's all we can do, and prepare as best as we can according to what we know. So once again, everybody, thanks for tuning in and enjoying this. If you found value in this, give it a thumbs up beneath this video. Then share this information with your family and friends so they can find out the other side of the equation as to what's going on outside of the mainstream narrative, which, is tainted to give you a unrealistic viewpoint, in my opinion. So, but other than that, be blessed, be safe, and I'll see you guys later. Enjoy your day.